The chief of the defense staff has said our military is not ready. As he prepares to say goodbye, we'll get his candid assessment on the state of the Canadian Armed Forces. I'm Mercedes Stephenson. The West Block starts now. Eyre is leaving his post as Canada's top soldier. With wars raging from Ukraine to the Middle East and domestic dependence on military help increasing, we'll ask how dire things are for the men and women in uniform. And on the diplomatic front, should Canada be ready to step up internationally? Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly says Canada will soon have a plan to hit NATO's spending target. But will it really happen? Militaries are supposed to be prepared and ready for anything. But when it comes to the Canadian Armed Forces, even our top brass have said that's not the case.
We must do better.
Earlier this year, the Minister of National Defense warned the military is in big trouble when it comes to having enough troops.
There's more people who've left than have entered. That is frankly, it's a death spiral.
And on Remembrance Day, our chief of the defense staff was blunt about Canada's readiness to fight a war or defend itself.
Mercedes, my biggest concern is not being ready, not having the capabilities, the people, the training, the sustainment ready to respond to what is really an uncertain future.
General Eyre never expected to be the CDS, but he found himself in that role, appointed in the midst of the sexual misconduct crisis as the government scrambled to find a general officer without skeletons in their closet. He has had to see the military through difficult times, spreading global conflict, a recruitment and retention crisis, a crisis as well in military equipment, and some cuts to military spending. Chief of the Defense Staff Eyre joins us now. General Eyre, great to see you.
Well, thanks for having me, Mercedes, and great to see you as well.
So yesterday was your 40th anniversary in uniform, an incredible achievement in career. You have watched such transformation in the global security system, in Canada's place in the world, in our armed forces. As you're preparing to leave, I want to ask you about the state of readiness of the Canadian Armed Forces, because when we've chatted in the past, you've talked about your concern that we are not ready for a war. So what is the state of national defense in this country, and are we prepared for a military conflict?
Oh, it's an interesting question because you mentioned 40 years, and as I think about the history of the military in this country, it could almost be considered a history in unpreparedness, as wars have come and we have had to scramble to be ready. And arguably, we are more ready now than we have been in some time, but that's not saying enough. And so as we take a look at the confluence of stressors in the global security environment that we're facing, probably more complex than we have ever faced as a country. The confluence of stressors geopolitically with the increasing alignment of Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, the continuing threat of violent extremist organizations, the disinformation that's happening right here in our own society, coupled with climate change, which is driving security concerns around the world. It's causing human migration, it's causing conflict, it's causing increased frequency and intensity of natural disasters here at home. It's opening up our own Arctic, which presents security challenges. We see the acceleration of technological change, which is changing the very character of war, how they are fought. And we're seeing that play out in Ukraine as we speak. And then we see what's happening within our societies, with our institutions of liberal democracy, journalism included, under assault. Our own institution under assault, the institution of elections under assault, and increased polarization in our societies. So those four combined present some real challenges to us as a country, and in particular the Canadian Armed Forces, because with those challenges, the demand on us is going to go up. And that's why readiness is so important. The ability to respond at speed, at scale, for the duration required, with the capabilities required. We have work to do on all of those. But I'm an optimist, cautiously optimistic right now that we are an institution on the upswing, that all sorts of improvements are being made across a wide range of areas. Not fast enough. We need to continue to emphasize a sense of urgency, and there still remains lots of work to do.
When you look at the threats to the Canadian Armed Forces, you mentioned foreign interference, so this is something I've been curious about. Are you concerned about your members being targeted for foreign interference by other countries? We've heard of members of the RCMP, for example, who have been charged that they were being influenced by foreign governments. Obviously, the military deals with very sensitive information. Is that a risk that you're looking at as well?
Yes, absolutely. We know we are a target. We know our members have some coveted information, some skills, experience, and so it's something we have to be very much on the lookout for. This is real. The threat is real, and often in Canada we are naive to the security challenges we face. It's very different when I travel to other parts of the world where the sense of insecurity is visceral. Go to Eastern Europe. I was recently in Estonia and Latvia, and the sense of insecurity due in large part to living memory of being occupied, and then seeing the vicious war crimes occurring in Ukraine, the forced deportation of tens of thousands of children, the rapes, the killings. They don't want that to happen. And so they have that sense of insecurity. We've been relatively isolated here, thankfully, in this country, protected by 3 oceans and a superpower to the south. Well, security is becoming global. We live in a globally integrated threat environment, and we need to be prepared for it.
How much faster do we need to move in order to be prepared for it?
Well, the marker I put down with the team is the end of this decade, beginning of the next. And the reason I say that is we take a look at the buildup of China's military. We take a look at Russia's ability to reconstitute from the war from their brutal war of aggression in Ukraine. Both being led by dictators, men of history and destiny, as they would see themselves. They're not getting any younger. Risk tolerance is going up. We need to coexist. We need to, as our top national security objective, avoid great power war. That's best done through the ability to collectively deter adventurism, expansionism, imperialism. And so that is the aim point that we are looking at internal to the Canadian Armed Forces.
You don't have a successor named yet, despite having mentioned quite publicly that you were planning to retire this summer. It's been months and months and months. You and I were both at the change of command for the Canadian Special Operations Forces. And at it, you talked about some of the consequences of having not named a successor yet. There's actually operational consequences, and there's consequences for military families who don't know where they're going to be posted to. Can you elaborate for us on a bit what the consequences have been of this slow response to name your successor?
Well, there's a process ongoing. We're not the only one who've had challenges like this in terms of slowing down of promotions. We saw that in the United States recently, and they succeeded through it. So, I'm confident that we will be able to, continue to move forward. This is a manifestation of the unequal dialogue in political military relations, which is absolutely proper in a democracy. The military has to be subservient to duly elected civilian officials.
What advice are you going to give your successor?
I've got almost a full notebook of advice, of transition notes that I've written up as various issues have come up. But in terms of advice, it's to be open. Just because one sits in this position doesn't mean one has all of the answers. The situation that we're facing is extremely complex. We have to be open to new ideas, new ways of doing business, external ideas. We have to be able to reframe what we have taken as underlying truths to a situation. I would recommend Adam Grant's book, Think Again, about doing just that, and continue to learn. Learning does not stop just because you finish your professional military education. Your professional development continues every day.
What do you think the biggest challenge will be for the next Chief of the Defence Staff?
The biggest challenge will be to continue to rebuild readiness at pace, to make sure that we've got the people, the training, the equipment, the sustainment in place to be able to respond at speed, at scale, at duration. And so continuing to focus on that, getting our numbers back up, cautiously optimistic as we've started this fiscal year on the recruiting side, much better than we have for many years. So our efforts at reconstitution are starting to bear fruit. We actually grew the armed forces last year after 3 years of shrinking. In fact, we are doing better than many of our closest allies from that perspective, but still tremendous amount of work to do there. So getting the people up, getting that readiness rebuilt, and continuing to provide options to government as crises continue to occur, because they will continue to occur at increasing frequency.
I have to ask you, with 40 years of experience, as you reflect on your career, what do you believe your biggest success was, and what's your biggest regret?
So I have had the opportunity to be involved in some very interesting experiences. You know, whether it was the Battle of Medak Pocket in Croatia in 1993, whether it was my time in Korea with the United Nations Command, tours in Afghanistan, and leading our largest to date advisory mission with the Afghan National Army. So all of those experiences are something I'll be processing in retirement. And thinking about because it has been such a rich, rewarding career. And as I say to the next generation, and I reflect on my career, and I see the trajectory that we are on, despite all of the challenges that are out there in the security environment, I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. It's an adventure. It's a way of life. It's an opportunity to do something bigger, and having that transcendent purpose of serving your country, having the adventure of going to many different locations around the world and being involved in those super interesting activities. And so, yeah, that's what I've taken away, and that's what I recommend to the next generation.
I know that you refer to yourself sometimes jokingly as the accidental CDS. You certainly haven't had an easy tenure, but we'd like to thank you on behalf of the West Bloc for always coming on the show and speaking so candidly about the situation, and on behalf of Canadians for your incredible service to this country. Well,
thank you, Mercedes.
Up next, as the depth of interference from China and India becomes more clear, we speak with Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly. As security around the globe becomes increasingly unstable, Canada is under even more pressure to step up internationally. NATO allies are demanding that Canada pay its fair share. Our Navy is surveilling Russian ships near Cuba, and Canada's engagement in the Middle East has been stunted. Joining me now is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mélanie Joly. Thank you so much for joining us. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Mercedes. It's a pleasure to be here.
You have an incredibly complicated file. There is so much happening in the world right now, and countries that used to be allies like India are now concerns and challenges. China reasserting its dominance, Iran, the Middle East, Russia. As you try to navigate these waters, I know that there had been obviously a very tense relationship with China for a while. It seems like your government is now re-engaging. I know your deputy minister went to China, the head of the Navy went recently. How would you describe that re-engagement, and why do you think now is the time to be pursuing a warmer relationship with China?
Yeah, thanks. It's a fair question. I think what I did last fall is I came up with a new foreign policy where we would be engaging in what I call pragmatic diplomacy. Is that we would engage with countries that we don't necessarily see eye to eye, that we don't necessarily share the same values or at the same time, the same political systems, but that we need to talk to in order to prevent an international conflict. So when it comes to China, we will, of course, challenge China when we ought to, and we'll cooperate when we must. And the areas of cooperation are the ones that were indicated in our Indo-Pacific strategy, which are climate change, things linked to health, also, of course, geopolitics, including, for example, what's happening in the Middle East, of course, in Ukraine as well, and at the same time, everything linked to AI. But to be frank, Mercedes, these are tough conversations. I don't see diplomacy as a gift you give to another country, allowing them to speak to you. I think it's the best way to convey really difficult messages in order to make sure that in the end, there's less tensions for us and in the world.
You mentioned the Indo-Pacific strategy, and
Yeah.
originally so much of that was premised on the idea that India was the counterweight to China. And now we have this information that India has plotted and successfully killed, your government alleges, a Canadian citizen in Canada. How do you navigate that whole part of the world now that you have both China and India as perhaps adversaries to Canada who are actively working against our interests in some cases, and your government says killing Canadian citizens?
And we stand by the allegations that Indian agents killed a Canadian on Canadian soil. And so this is a breach of our sovereignty as a country. This is, of course, against Canadians' safety. And we will make sure that not only do we work and let the RCMP do its work, but my job is to make sure that I can address the diplomatic effects of that in a private manner with the foreign minister. To your point about the Indo-Pacific strategy, we've done so much right now. First, to increase our knowledge about China, creating a Chinese bureau within also our department at Foreign Affairs, because of course we know China's influence in the world is wide-ranging, and we need to increase our knowledge about that. Second, we've decided to make sure that we would increase our relationship with Japan and Korea at the same level as we are with the UK, with France and Germany. So we're deepening a relationship in the region. There's a far range of countries with really a lot of populations, and that's what we're doing as we speak.
When it comes to dealing with India diplomatically, part of the question has been how high up this plot went. I keep hearing the name Amit Shah, who is Modi's right-hand man. That would suggest that this was not a one-off, not rogue agents running an operation, but actually planned from the inner circle in the Modi government. Have you heard that information?
What I can tell you, we are in a rule of law country. We have an investigation ongoing. And my job as foreign minister is to make sure that I let the police forces do their work and trial people, and meanwhile, that I do the work of addressing security concerns with India, which I'm doing.
I do want to ask you as well about the Middle East, which of course is top of mind for a lot of people right now. Your government shifted positions on the two-state solution. You still believe, obviously, in a two-state solution, but there's a willingness to accept a Palestinian state before the end of the war. Is that contingent on Hamas being eliminated?
I didn't see it before the end of the war. So first and foremost, we had for a long time, a position that the parties needed to agree. And from the moment they agreed on a two-state solution, we would recognize a Palestinian state. Now, we know right now that Hamas is a problem. Hamas is still in control of Gaza, still in control of hostages. And at the same time, the Netanyahu government is against a two-state solution. So we can't just wait indefinitely for this to happen. We need to signal the fact that we're moving our long-standing position to recognize a Palestinian state at the right time.
When it comes to international engagement, one of the pressures Canada has been under is more defense spending. You've talked about getting to 2%, having a plan to get to 2%. So I want to ask you a fairly straightforward question. In July, at the NATO summit, will you have a solid plan for when and how you are getting to 2% of GDP spending on defense?
So thank you for your question. I think it's a fair question. I think that first and foremost, Canadians know we need to increase defense spending. We saw, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, things changed in the world, and for a long, long time we thought that our geography was protecting us and we need to invest more in us, in our own defense. Russia is a neighbor to our north. We need to defend our own Arctic, assert our sovereignty, safeguard our security. And so now we have a defense policy update that brings us to 1.76%. That's what the Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister announced 2 months ago.
In 5 years from now, at best case scenario.
And they said that we would be on a path to 2%. We know that there's procurement processes that we need to do. That's just part of having a strong CAF, Canadian Armed Forces. And so we will launch these processes, and at the same time, I'm convinced we will be able to get to 2%. We want the NATO summit to be a success. It needs to for us, for all allies, for American friends, and also for NATO itself and Ukraine. So we will be there for burden sharing.
How much pressure are you getting from allies like the United States and the UK to have a solid plan, not just a commitment that you want to get there aspirational, but here's how, when, and the equipment we're buying, for example, the submarines?
So they reacted very positively, and I must say particularly the US, to our defense policy update. Why? Because, and I think maybe some NATO allies were surprised, we decided to invest in North America.
Although the American ambassador was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he said that Canada is essentially the outlier and the laggard when it comes to NATO spending.
Well, I think that I had many conversations with David Cohen, the ambassador, who's a good friend, and he's been very supportive of our investments. But indeed, we need to get to 2%. That's what people expect us to do, and that's what Canadians expect us to do. We as a government have invested more than any other government in defense. But the reality is the world has changed, so we will invest more in defense. And indeed, you mentioned submarines. We need to launch procurement on that. We're working on icebreakers. There's lots to come and good news coming.
So to make sure we're clear, you're going to get the submarines.
We need to make sure that we work on military equipment. We know we have to invest in submarines, but I'm not the Minister of Defense. I'm the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but I know that procurement has an impact on the relationship you have with other countries, so that's why we're taking that decision very, very carefully.
Absolutely, and of course our defense policy is there to reinforce our foreign policy.
Exactly, they go hand in hand.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Minister.
It's a pleasure, Mercedes. Thank you.
Up next, one last thing. Foreign interference escalates when a party leader says that he was also a target. Now for one last thing. The foreign interference file led to even more explosive allegations on Parliament Hill last week, with NDP leader Jagmeet Singh saying this after he read the classified report.
I was a target.
In a bombshell press conference, Singh didn't hold back on what he thought of parliamentarians who were named in the report, accused of colluding with foreign powers to the detriment of Canada.
They are indeed traitors to the country.
Singh telegraphed his outrage, accusing his political opponents of doing nothing because he says they benefit from the current situation.
Both Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre are putting the interests of their party ahead of the country.
While Singh's passion to hold those who have undermined Canada accountable is admirable, it seems to have its limits. Singh would not answer questions about why he continues to prop up the Liberal government, despite what he described as a failure to act, despite knowing how serious the problem was.
Why continue to back them up?
We're not at all doing that. What we're saying is we're going to demand answers. We're going to continue to push for solutions.
If Mr. Singh is going to accuse the government of knowingly ignoring what he called traitors in Parliament, then Canadians need a better explanation and answer about why he isn't holding the Liberals accountable when he has the power to do so. That's it for our show. Thanks for watching. And to all the amazing dads out there, we wish you a happy Father's Day. We'll see you here next week for our season finale.